Well, good morning and welcome to Dome at Home. We are here covering the live launch of the James Webb Space Telescope. You can see there a live view on the right side. That is the direct feed from NASA from the launch pad in Kourou, French Guiana, South America, just on the east coast, just between Brazil and Suriname. And we are having a little bit of a noise here. There we go. Let's see. That's a little bit better. We are watching the live launch. The James Webb Space Telescope is a fantastic piece of equipment. It's a $10 billion successor to the famous Hubble Space Telescope, which has been, without a doubt, one of the most spectacular scientific missions in history. We're gearing up for James Webb to exceed that in every way. It's bigger, it's newer, it's got a whole bunch of technology that wasn't available back in the 90s when Hubble was launched. So we're really excited for this. We're less than an hour from launch. The Ariane 5 rocket is sitting there on the pad. Just getting a little bit of an echo here. Isn't that weird? Well, I'm going to see, hopefully you're not getting the echo out there. Oh, hi Hollis, nice to see you, joining us from down south. It's nice to be here. Merry Christmas. This is the first morning that I have been awake before my kids on Christmas morning ever. Let's just say ever. So that is entertaining. I'm not quite sure why I'm getting all this feedback, so I'm just going to see what I can do about that. We are going to take a quick peek at the James Webb Space Telescope's mission, do a little overview here while we're waiting in the countdown. The rocket there on the pad has been fueled, and we're sort of just going through the last minute checks and things like that. Things really start to happen at T-minus 10 minutes, and that is really when all of this stuff happens very, very quickly. The rocket gets ready for launch. We will get a go or no go for launch at T-minus 10 minutes. So hopefully everything is go. The weather looks cloudy there, but apparently it's not a concern. Yesterday there was a launch scheduled, but then quickly bumped because they had some issues with upper level winds and things like that. You don't want a serious wind blowing the rocket off course. The great thing about Webb, of course, it's a big mission, but that also means that that engineers and scientists are being extra cautious, and they're not going to launch if there's any extra risk of what's going on in the launch. So let's take a quick look at the beginning of the launch and the basic idea behind the mission, and then we'll be back with our live updates as the launch progresses.
This is your telescope. An engineering marvel, an exploration powerhouse. Use it to look back in time and explore the first galaxies that formed after the Big Bang. To peer into atmospheres of planets orbiting the stars. It's your eyepiece to the uncharted, unknown, and unimagined. This is the largest, most complex, and challenging space telescope ever constructed. It will change our understanding of the universe and our place in it. The James Webb Space Telescope. Equipped with the largest primary mirror ever to be flown in space, at 6.5 meters, it's more than 6 times the size of the Hubble Space Telescope primary mirror. Webb's 4 cutting-edge infrared instruments and cameras operate at super cold temperatures colder than the surface of Pluto. Getting this cold is done with the help of the largest sun shield ever flown, a 5-layer, tennis court-sized sun shield that blocks heat from the sun, Earth, and Moon. Webb will be the first telescope to detect light from the most distant galaxies in the universe. These first galaxies formed about 13.5 billion years ago, only 300 or so million years after the Big Bang. Webb carries advanced technologies to tackle some of the most fundamental questions about the universe. How did the first galaxies form and evolve? Are there chemical signatures of the building blocks of life on other worlds? Is our solar system unique? Launching such a large telescope into space is an incredible engineering challenge. Fully deployed, Webb is too large to fit inside any rocket fairing. Engineers designed it to be folded, like origami, to squeeze inside the European Space Agency's 5-meter diameter Ariane 5 rocket fairing. After launch, controllers on the ground deploy Webb remotely. Deployment is an intricate ballet. For nearly 3 weeks, controllers carefully unfold Webb. After this delicate dance, Webb's golden mirrors are precisely aligned using motors behind each hexagonal mirror segment, adjusting them to form one perfect mirror. Once the instruments are fully cooled, the exploration will begin. Webb is a technological challenge like no other, born of the efforts of thousands of people across the United States, Canada, and Europe. The James Webb Space Telescope is your telescope. Use it to explore, to challenge theories, to see sights yet unseen. It's yours to unfold the beauty and mystery in the universe and our place in it.
So we're back with live views of the Ariane 5 rockets on the pad in Kourou in French Guiana in South America. We are waiting for the launch of the James Webb Space Telescope. Thanks for joining us. For those of you that are out there, it is great to be here with you on this lovely Christmas morning. We do have audio coming in from the pad, and it's a unique experience. If you haven't seen a launch from Kourou before, of course, most of the NASA launches all come from Florida, the Russian ones from Kazakhstan. But here's the sound of course, most of the NASA that we're hearing from behind the rocket. From Florida, the Russian jungle noises. There are birds and all sorts of animals that are going on in the background there, and it's quite unique. So it gives you a really good sense of birds and all sorts of animals that are going. There we go. I found my echo problem. It's a really good sense of a difference here. And there's definitely a difference in the air when you're watching and listening in on the NASA feeds as they're going through, European Space Agency feeds as they're going through the countdown. This is a big mission, and it's one of those ones where everything has to work. With the Hubble Space Telescope in 1990 when it was launched, there was a design flaw with it where the mirror was actually made improperly, which would have been catastrophic. But Hubble was only about 400 kilometers away from the Earth, in orbit around the Earth, and that allowed it to be reached by the space shuttle and then serviced. And not only did they correct that error, but they also went and upgraded the instruments and those kinds of things. That's not possible with the Webb Space Telescope. It will be 1.5 million kilometers away from Earth. It is in a place where no spacecraft can really get to, certainly no human spacecraft at this point. So everything has to work. And I know the folks at Arianespace who are in charge of the launcher want to make sure that everything works on the launch end, because of course that first half hour or so is critical to the mission. If the rocket has a problem, that's a problem for the whole telescope. So it's definitely a high tension kind of launch, and everyone is very, I won't say worried, concerned, working diligently to make this work. As you heard in the clip there, this is a multinational project. James Webb Space Telescope is a conglomeration of NASA, the European Space Agency, ESA, and the Canadian Space Agency. Canada has a couple of instruments on board the telescope, and we'll be talking a little bit about those. Later on, we'll be joined by Dr. Sara Gallagher, the science advisor to the Canadian Space Agency, who will tell us a little bit about the instruments. There's a brief little overview that the CSA has produced that gives us a sense of what's going on in terms of the Canadian contribution. So let's take a look at that now while we wait for the launch of the James Webb Space Telescope.
The James Webb Space Telescope is the most powerful space observatory ever built. Gathering infrared light invisible to the human eye, its penetrating gaze will behold the earliest moments in cosmic time and search distant worlds for evidence of life. The Canadian Space Agency is collaborating with NASA and the European Space Agency on the James Webb Telescope. Canada has contributed 2 key elements, the NIRISS instrument and the Fine Guidance Sensor. NIRISS will keep watch as faraway planets pass in front of their host stars and will gather the spectrum of light filtering through the atmospheres of rocky super-Earths, mysterious ocean worlds, and gigantic hot Jupiters to create a chemical fingerprint that could be a match with the vital clues of life. Water, carbon dioxide, and oxygen may lurk within the atmospheres of these enigmatic exoplanets. NIRISS will also take a closer look at the distant universe, peering back in time to see youthful galaxies just cosmic minutes after they form. To perform these unprecedented observations, sometimes from billions of light years away, the telescope's gaze must stay perfectly still. Webb's Fine Guidance Sensor will latch onto key reference points in deep space during all of the telescope's observations. Its remarkable precision will help the telescope capture sharp images of swirling, merging galaxies, newborn stars, and bubbling nebulas that have never been seen before. The James Webb Space Telescope will pierce through layers of cosmic dust to unveil the unique mysteries of the universe and fuel groundbreaking astronomical research for decades to come.
And we're back with live views of the Ariane 5 launch pad in Kourou in South America, where the James Webb Space Telescope sits under the pointy end of that rocket, ready for its ride into space. We are at about half an hour before launch. At T-minus 30 minutes, that's where the engineers prepare for what's called the synchronized sequence. That's basically where they're getting everything ready for the 10-minute sequence where the rocket is essentially on automatic, where everything happens too quickly for humans to be sitting there pressing buttons. So there's a lot of checking of instruments, monitoring the fueling, making sure that the cryogenic hydrogen and oxygen that are on board are at the proper levels, and everything is ready to go. Right now, we're not seeing any obstacles for launch. It looks like a cloudy day there in the jungle launch pad, but it certainly looks like we're going to be go for launch at this point, but we'll have to see. Now remember, the launch of the Webb Space Telescope, it's going out to a particular spot in space, but it's not linking up with another spacecraft like the International Space Station launches. So it doesn't have a 1-second launch window. If they're not quite ready at our scheduled launch time of 6:20, they have about 32 minutes worth of time where they can hold or delay just to make sure that everything is working properly. If there's a sensor malfunction or something like that, they've got some time to work the problem before having to give up for the day. So that's kind of nice. Usually when we're watching an International Space Station launch, if there's a problem that's going to delay them at all, basically the launch gets scrubbed and recycled for the next day. But here we've got 32 minutes to work through any issues. So that's pretty nice. Barring anything major, we are going to see the successor to the Hubble Space Telescope rocket into space and begin its epic mission of discovery. So we'll be monitoring the launch feed there. Good morning, everyone. Nice to be with you. My name is Scott Young. I'm the planetarium astronomer at the Manitoba Museum here in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada, in Treaty 1 territory and the homeland of the Métis Nation, up before my kids for the very first time, although I did decide to stay in my Christmas pajamas. This is not a Star Trek red shirt cosplay uniform. This is actually just my Christmas pajamas. We all got matching pajamas for this particular Christmas, so kind of nice and very comfortable. I love the one aspect of working at home where you can be in pajamas and nobody knows, unless of course you're broadcasting live over the internet. I had the opportunity to sit down and chat long distance with Dr. Sara Gallagher. She's an astronomer at the University of Waterloo and is also the science advisor to the president of the Canadian Space Agency. And I wanted to chat with her to get a little bit more insight on the Canadian content of the Webb mission, a little bit more about the instruments and how it all fits, and also the people behind the team. So while we wait for launch, let's just take a look at a little bit of that interview. We may cut back as things start to happen, but we will get you that entire interview over the course of the broadcast today. So let's talk to Dr. Sara Gallagher.
Hello, I'm Sara Gallagher, and I'm the science advisor to the president of the Canadian Space Agency.
Excellent. Well, welcome to the program, Sara. Thank you very much for joining us today. We're very excited to hear about Canada's role on the James Webb Space Telescope. What can you tell us?
Oh, I can tell you lots of things. First of all, the Canadian Space Agency and astronomers across the country are so excited for the launch of the James Webb Space Telescope. So there's lots of reasons we're excited. So the astronomers are excited because James Webb is just going to be fabulous. It's going to let us do things that we have not been able to do before, see things we haven't been able to see before, and also find things that we have not even expected. And the other reason we're so excited is that the Canadian Space Agency has contributed really significantly to this telescope. We've contributed 2 instruments that are really going to allow fabulous science and actually allow the James Webb Telescope to function.
That's excellent. Well, what can you tell us about the instruments then?
Well, we have contributed 2 instruments. So the first instrument is called the Fine Guidance Sensor. And the Fine Guidance Sensor is the camera and the system that allows the telescope to point really, really precisely. So it has a camera and it takes pictures of star fields and it finds stars in them and it keeps track of where those stars are. So the telescope knows exactly where it's pointing. And if it starts to wiggle a little bit, it's got a special mirror that adjusts to keep the picture completely still on all the instruments. And that's what you need in order to have those beautiful pictures that we're expecting, because as you know, if you have a camera and you jiggle it around, then it smears your image and we won't be able to get the beautiful images that we need.
And we'll be bringing you more of that interview with Dr. Sara Gallagher in just a few moments. We're coming up to about 30 minutes before launch and listening in to see if there's any kind of chatter on the mission control. We're not getting anything through the clean feed here. I'm just checking over on NASA TV's regular channels. Of course, there are live broadcasts all over the place for this. NASA's doing one, the European Space Agency is doing one, the Canadian Space Agency is doing one from their headquarters outside Montreal, and I'm doing one because we love this kind of stuff. It's really exciting to sort of follow along and see exactly what's going on and be a part of these missions. I remember when Hubble was launched, it just seemed like another space shuttle mission. There were a lot of them going at the time, and it was another payload. Yeah, it was kind of cool. And then there was, of course, the big disaster of, oh no, the Hubble's mirror is not working, is not made properly. And it was a bit of a letdown. And it wasn't till a couple of years later that really Hubble came into its own with the repair mission and the servicing missions, and it became one of the most spectacular instruments of all time. And I kind of always have regretted, looking back, that I didn't get more excited over the launch itself, because it was, like I say, one shuttle mission out of, I don't know, half a dozen that year or whatever, and it just seemed a little more routine. This year, for this telescope, I decided that I would be a part of the whole thing. And so we've been following the construction, we've been following the instruments and things like that, and now we're here for the live launch. We're going to head back to chat a little bit about the instruments with Dr. Sara Gallagher. So sit back, relax, and we'll bring you any updates as they occur. Now, what other kinds of Canadian contributions have there been on the Webb telescope?
So there's a second instrument that we contributed, and this is a science instrument. So the instrument is called NIRIS, and that stands for Near Infrared Imaging and Slitless Spectrograph. So you might say, what does that mean? And it allows us to do really cool things. So one of the things that the instrument allows us to do, and one of the reasons it was made, because a lot of Canadian scientists are really excited and interested in planets around other stars, exoplanets, is that what it does is you have a star right here, and if you have a planet passing in front of that star, it blocks the light from that star, and the starlight passes through the atmosphere of the planet. And what NIRIS will do is it will take a spectrum, which is it will look at all the light from the star that passes through the atmosphere of the planet, and it'll look for signatures of life. For example, you might have special molecules in an atmosphere that we can only explain with life, with the processes of life, as far as we know. And so this is one of the key science goals that's going to be pursued. And the Canadian instrument is going to be a really important piece of trying to answer those questions and look for those signatures.
Well, that's exciting. That's one of the big questions that we often get from viewers. You know, how do we find life on these exoplanets that we're starting to detect? So it's amazing that Canadians will be involved in that. Now, the instruments are one part of things, but obviously there's a whole bunch of Canadian scientists and administrators and engineers all involved with this. What can you tell us about the team of Canadians working with the Webb telescope?
We have so many teams. So there's the team, the instrument team. So we have the Canadians who contributed to actually building the instruments, and that team is diverse. So we have the scientists and the engineers and the project managers at the Canadian Space Agency. We also have scientists at the University of Montreal that were behind the science case for the science instruments. And then we also have a number of people at Honeywell, who's our industry partner, who basically built the instruments. As well as there are also people across the country who've contributed to the science case, the science projects that the instruments are going to be used for, those primary instruments. And there's other companies as well who've contributed components and expertise to building the instruments. They're very complicated, as I'm sure you can imagine. And so it takes a giant team in order to make that happen.
Let's fast forward just a little bit here. Assuming the launch goes on time and everything works properly, and can you tell us a little bit about what we can expect next?
Sure, absolutely. So first of all, the telescope is going really far. So it has to go all the way out to what's called L2, the Lagrange point 2. And that's a place where the gravity of Earth and the gravity of the sun are balanced. We want it really far away from the Earth so that, first of all, the Earth doesn't get in the way. And also the environment there is very thermally stable. So the first thing that happens after launch is that, and this is within the first couple hours, is the solar panels have to deploy. And that's because you need to get power to the telescope. So that happens almost right away. There's also an antenna that will deploy as well, because the people on the ground need to be able to talk to the telescope. And then it takes basically a full month to get out to L2. It's 1.5 million kilometers away, which I'm sure you can appreciate. That's very far. So it takes a while to get there. And as it's going, it's going to be gradually unfolding. And so first of all, the sunshades have to deploy, and they have to be stretched out and separated. That happens right away so that the telescope can start cooling, because it takes a while for it to cool enough so that it can be used for science operations. The mirror has to unfold. And then once the mirror unfolds, it has to be aligned. And then all of the different systems in the telescope have to be tested out to make sure that the temperature is right and the power is right and everything's working the way it's supposed to be.
We'll bring you more of that interview with Dr. Sara Gallagher of the Canadian Space Agency, Science Advisor of the Canadian Space Agency, throughout the course of the broadcast. We are just about 24 minutes from launch time, the scheduled launch of the James Webb Space Telescope. Welcome to the broadcast. If you're just joining us, I'm seeing more and more folks filter in, presumably as the alarms go off and the coffee pots are ready to go. It is an early morning here in Winnipeg, where we're broadcasting from. Dawn has already broken down in Carew, though, where the Space Telescope sits on the launch pad. So right now, the Ariane 5 has been fueled. They actually started the countdown a little bit after midnight, local time, or midnight our time here, and the big tanks at the bottom there are full of hydrogen and oxygen, liquid hydrogen and oxygen at extremely low temperatures. You can see some venting happening from the bottom left of the spacecraft. That material, as it warms up, expands into gas, and that has to be vented out to avoid any pressure problems. And they keep topping up the fuel to keep it at the right levels. And then just before launch, they will top up the fuel, close off all of those vents, and the spacecraft will basically be ready to go. We will be taking a look at various aspects of the mission. You heard Dr. Gallagher speaking there a little bit about the process of what goes on to get this spacecraft out to where it needs to be. It is the first time we're sending a spacecraft to this position in space. It is I won't say risky, but that's sort of a key part of the mission, one of the critical path to success here. The launch requires obviously getting off the Earth properly. The rocket has to work, getting to the right path so that it can coast all the way out to L2. The engines won't be firing that whole way. The idea is that the rocket gives it exactly the direction and the velocity that the space telescope needs, so that it gets out to that area of L2 and gets into that proper orbit. So James Webb Space Telescope won't be orbiting the Earth, it will be orbiting the Sun in a position that makes it very well aligned with the Earth. So essentially, okay, let's see what we can do here. Can't hear me anymore. Well, that's unfortunate. Let me just make sure that our microphone is working. Thanks for the heads up, Hollis. I appreciate that. Let's see. We will just get a little bit of... Okay, how about now? There we go. For some reason, that particular one did not have a microphone. Okay, so normally when we would do a broadcast like this with multiple cameras and all sorts of things, it is usually involves a host on screen, but then there's a producer behind the screens twiddling all the buttons and things like that. I'm doing all that today, so flying solo. Thanks for your patience. Oh, hi, Brenda. Nice to see you. Yep. Good morning. Merry Christmas. I'm back. So the orbit of the telescope basically is in this strange position called L2, which is a point directly in line with the Sun and the Earth, and about 1.5 million kilometers farther away from the Sun than the Earth is. You don't want the telescope to be completely in the Earth's shadow, though, so it sort of has this up and down loop where it orbits the L2 position as the L2 position and the Earth both orbit the Sun. So you get this sort of up and down, almost like a merry-go-round horse going around the Sun. And that allows it to sort of stay in position with a minimum of propellant, but it also allows the spacecraft to sort of remain oriented the same way. And the thing, of course, about the orientation, and hopefully you've still got my audio here. The thing about the orientation is that the telescope has these sun shields, and the sun shields will block out the sun and allow the instrument to cool down. So once they get out to L2, these sun shields will have already sort of unfolded like origami, as they say. They get stretched out. They're made of thin mylar. Looks like the mylar in those shiny balloons, but it's thinner. It's about the thickness of a human hair. And these 5 layers will be stretched out like a kite. And then they will be separated from each other to create even more insulation. There's no air out in space, of course, so there's no air to transmit the heat from one layer to another, but the heat does get absorbed into things and then re-radiated. And so the idea is that with these multiple layers, you will block out much more of the heat and isolate the telescope thermally so that there's no heat coming to the telescope. Because the instruments, basically, infrared light is heat. So we're detecting heat. And so if your telescope is hot, that's going to be a problem, and you need to remove as much of that as possible. Once the sunshades deploy, the telescope will never see the sun again, because it will be in its position at L2. It will keep the sunshade always pointed towards the Earth and the Sun in its orbit, and that will mean that the telescope has 24/7 beautiful dark views of the sky. Hey Bob, nice to see you. Thanks for joining us. I think we're having some internet issues. I'm noticing that the internet seems to be a little slow. So let's pop back to the live feed from Karoo here. I had all of these feeds running since last night, just to make sure that we didn't have any problems logging in this morning or so on, and my speed meter has gone down as we get closer to launch, which tells me that there's a pretty high level of interest of people watching. So we're a little bit over 16 minutes to schedule the opening of the scheduled launch window at 6:20 a.m. Central Time, and we are eagerly awaiting the launch of the Space Telescope. Just going to check out our viewers here. Hey, it's great to see so many people up this early. I was saying earlier that this is the first Christmas that I have been awake before my kids since I had kids, basically. So it's kind of entertaining. My voice is a little subdued because they are still sleeping, and I kind of want to let that go as long as possible, because I do plan after the launch to go have a little nap, because it's been an early morning here. I can only imagine what the schedule is like for the folks working the mission. They must have basically converted to a nighttime schedule to get all of this work done. So the Ariane 5 is a heavy lift rocket. It's one of the larger rockets to lift satellites, and it's got the two having a little voice problems. It has the 2 side boosters there that help get it off the ground. Those are solid boosters, kind of like the ones they used on the space shuttle, designed by the European Space Agency and their contractors. And then the central rocket is powered by liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen. The Space Telescope itself is basically in the upper part, the white part of that rocket, the one with all the logos all over it, and it's all folded up, as we saw in that mission. So the mirror segments on the side are folded out, the secondary mirror is folded away, and all the sunshade is folded away. I spent a little bit of time on the various websites, and one of the cool things that the European Space Agency has done and NASA has done is that they have made a paper model of the telescope available for you. So you can make your own Webb space telescope out of paper. And it gives a pretty good sense. I mean, obviously the engineering is not quite as good as the real thing, particularly these sunshades. I gained a lot of respect trying to put this together just out of paper. Can't imagine how it would be to put together in real life. Insanely complicated, but vital to the operation of the telescope. So you can download this from the NASA website, jwst.nasa.gov. And I will say that this is the medium difficulty model, and it took me probably about 4 hours to do. There is a more kid-friendly model where all of these sunshade things are just done as one block, and that's probably the one to do if you've got young kids or less patience. But it does have all the elements. You know, you've got the residual part of the spacecraft booster here. You've got the first solar panel that unfurls. There's the star trackers over here. This is what helps the spacecraft sort of stay oriented. And then the sun shields, all of these layers here. If I had thought about it, I would have got one of those Mylar balloons and used that silvery material for this, but it was hard enough with just paper, so we'll go with that. And then the primary mirror, which seems to disappear into my green screen here, but it's got the 18 hexagonal segments. Here's the secondary mirror. This is the mirror that would reflect, you know, the light coming in from hitting the primary mirror, gets focused down to this mirror, and then goes through this little cone in here where it is fed to the instruments. And the instruments are all sitting in this section back here, and there's a series of heat vents and things like that so that the instruments stay nice and cool. So anyway, quite a fun little thing here. This is something that threw me for a little bit.
Katie, Merry Christmas to our worldwide audience from our broadcast.
We're coming into NASA's look here, so we're just going to pop over and listen to NASA's Rob Navias introduce the launch.
Value chain for the European Space Agency. Luce, good morning. Encapsulating the telescope atop the upper stage of the Ariane 5 rocket. And Luce, as we enter the most critical phase of the countdown, can you outline some of the upcoming critical activities as we head into the phase called synchronized sequence?
Yes, Rob. We are now reaching the end of this 11-hour sequence that we call the chronology, and that started yesterday evening. All systems here have been prepared for the final launch operations. And at the time being, it's rather quiet now inside the launch table and also inside the launcher. We were told a few minutes ago by the launch control center here that the launcher fluids and electric systems are ready for the final automated sequence. They are on hold now, waiting for the last weather report at minus 10 minutes. After this weather report, 3 minutes later, we will have the beginning of this famous synchronized sequence when all systems will be made ready for the liftoff. This sequence will first be run by the ground calculator, and then the onboard computer will take the lead step by step, and the launch vehicle will be made autonomous from the ground system.
Et donc le lanceur va devenir autonome des systèmes de sol.
Cryogenic stage,
Vous savez que nous
upper stage
avons
and main
deux
stage.
étages cryogéniques.
All four tanks are,
L'étage
of
principal
course,
et l'étage
thermally
supérieur. Il y
insulated
a
from the
4
hot
réservoirs.
environment
Ces
we
réservoirs
are
sont
here in French
isolés,
Guiana.
protégés du climat chaud
However,
et humide
these
de la
liquid
Guyane.
propellants are at
Mais
very low
ces
temperature, and because of that,
liquides sont
slightly evaporate.
à des
To
températures basses et
ensure
donc ils
they are
s'évaporent
perfectly
légèrement.
loaded at liftoff,
Donc,
their
pour
final
que les
loading
réservoirs
and topping
soient
up
bien
will
pleins
last
au
up to
décollage,
4 minutes
on
before the launch.
continue
So that
de
will be the beginning
remplir
of
ces
the
réservoirs
synchronized
jusqu'à moins
sequence run
4
by the ground
secondes.
calculators.
Donc, c'est
Then we
ainsi
will have
que
on the fleet side
les calculateurs
the end
de
of
sol
the topping
suivent
up, the
cette
final loading
séquence.
and the topping
Et
up
une fois que
of the different
plein
tanks.
est fait,
And on
et
the
le plein des
electric
réservoirs a
side,
terminé,
we will have the onboard
nous
computer
allons
getting
voir
prepared
côté
for the launch
électrique
also, and it will be
l'ordinateur de bord qui se
uploaded
prépare
with the
et le
H0
H0
type,
télécharger
for the
sur
liftoff,
cet ordinateur de bord
which is
pour
today
préparer
at
le
9,
décollage
beginning of the
qui est
window,
prévu
9:20 local
aujourd'hui
time,
à
7:20
9h20
Eastern
heure
time.
locale, 7h20 à Washington, et nous avons une fenêtre de tir de 31
And Luce, we're coming up on that final weather report. We expect all systems to remain green. We'll be going down to the fishbowl to confirm that just a moment or two from now. It's a 27-minute ride to orbit from liftoff until the time that the Webb observatory is separated from the upper stage of the Ariane 5 rocket. Several minutes later, the commands will be given to unfurl its solar array, followed by the confirmation from the telescope controllers in Baltimore that we are power positive, meaning that electrical current is flowing through that solar array.
So Rob Navius from NASA's Public Affairs there, going through the basics you can hear in the background. The official language of the European Space Agency operations is French, and so that is what the mission control chatter is, which is not as difficult for us here in Canada, but is a little bit more challenging for the folks out in the States, perhaps. Although, maybe not. There are a number of people, of course, that'll speak French down there as well. So we're just a little bit less than 9 minutes to launch, and we have received that currently the count is proceeding. So things are basically go for launch. Coming up at 8 minutes, all the payloads go onto internal power. So they pull the plugs that are keeping things going on the pad there. And that is really the point where they start to look at are we ready to go or not. At 7 minutes, it goes onto the automatic sequence. So if we get past the 7-minute mark, we are almost certainly going to space today. So let's pop back to the NASA feed here. There you can see what they call the fishbowl, which is basically the mission control there for the launch center at Arianespace. And they are providing all the details, basically the same thing as the crew in Florida does for the launches of the other spacecraft that we're more familiar with. We're just about to hear all the details of the synchronized sequence. So we're going to bring back our NASA feed here. The voice you'll hear is Rob Navius, and then the mission controllers at Arianespace.
Here in the mission control center, there he is. He will be calling the start of synchronized sequence, all of the critical countdown milestones, and we will be listening very intently for his calls. Let's stand by.
À tous de DDO. Attention pour la séquence finale lanceur. Top. À 0 moins 7 minutes.
So we have in fact gone into synchronized sequence, which means that everything is now going to automatic. They have they're preparing to close out the vents for all the fueling, and the liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen is being basically turned off so that the spacecraft tanks will pressurize and be ready for the launch sequence. Over the next 6.5 minutes, we have a number of things that happen. All of the various stages are checked out. At 3 minutes and 30 seconds, the onboard computer will calculate, based on a number of factors, exactly when launch will occur. But the schedule is for 6:20. There may be delays or things like that, of course, as well. So that is something that can be built in. And again, we have a 32-minute launch window if anything does go wrong.
Pour atteindre son point d'observation Lagrange 2.
In a little more than 1 minute from now, we will see the 4 tanks pressurized at their flight level for the last test before the ignition of the Vulcan engine. And in parallel, the electric system are also set in flight configuration. The onboard computer, the electrical power, as for the telescope, it will switch from ground to internal power 1 minute before the launch, 1 minute and 5 seconds before the launch. And we are going to see -6 seconds. At -6 seconds, we will see the disconnection of the upper stage, this big cryotechnic arms you can see on this picture. Then, 3 seconds before the H0, the inertial platform that will give all the information about where it is to the launcher will be released. And at H0, the 7-second sequence to ignite the Vulcan engine of the main stage will start. That will take 7 seconds, a little less than 7 seconds, where the engine will start up to its flight regime. Once the computer has checked that the Vulcan engine is running normally, and you will see at that point the flame going stable at the outlet of the nozzle. And at that point, the onboard computer will ignite the 2 boosters that will enable to move the 770 tons of Ariane.
Coming up on the T-4 minute mark right now. Just a couple of milestones real quick. At the 1 minute 5 second mark into the flight, Ariane 5 will go through the period of maximum dynamic pressure, max Q as it's known. That will be the period of maximum aerodynamic forces on the rocket itself. The solid rocket boosters, which will provide about 90% of the initial thrust off the launch pad, will shut down and separate at the 2 minute 21 second mark into the flight, followed a minute and 5 seconds after that by fairing jettison. That will expose the James Webb Space Telescope to the environment of flight for the first time. The main stage separation, or the first stage separation, comes at the T-minus at the 8 minute 47 second mark into the flight, and that will be about a 16-minute burn of that upper stage engine. It will cut off at about 24 minutes 51 seconds into the flight, and then we'll go into a coast phase of about 2.5 minutes to allow any oscillations to dampen out, provide the most pristine environment for the James Webb Telescope before observatory separation. We're coming up on the 2 minute 50 second mark into the flight. Again, you're going to be hearing critical calls down the stretch here from the DDO, or the Range Operations Manager, Jean-Luc Boyer.
Sounds like the weather is go. There are no issues for launch, and so we're heading into the critical moments here. 2 minutes 25 seconds to launch, and we will be seeing a number of things happen very, very quickly here. We're going to switch back at this point to mission control at Arianespace in Kourou, French Guiana, and we'll be hearing the voices of the mission controllers, as well as Rob Navius from NASA Public Affairs on NASA TV. We'd like to thank our partners at NASA for letting us carry the launch, and I'll be back with you, assuming that the launch goes, and we'll chat a little bit more about what will be happening from this point on. So let's get back to the live feed.
The flight will be in 2 phases. You will see the first part of the flight during the solid rocket boosters phase. That will be
So everybody's leaving there so that they can go outside and see the launch, because nobody wants to watch it from inside.
Reduce the aerodynamic loads, and we will have a very different
pour réduire
flight after that.
le frottement, et nous aurons après.
And you were watching a number of people, VIPs and invited guests, moving out to the observation platform that is right next to the Jupiter Control Center, as we stand by for the 1-minute call from Jean-Luc Voyer.
À tous les vidéos, attention pour moins 1 minute.
Dans le ciel de Kourou.
Top, à 0 moins 1 minute.
Thumbs up from Jean-Luc Voyer. All systems are go. We're inside a minute now. T-minus 50 seconds and counting. As you heard earlier, the Vulcan 2 engine will ignite. Turbo pumps will come up to flight speed for 7 seconds, and the command will be issued to ignite the solid rocket boosters. The James Webb Space Telescope will be on its way.
Le télescope s'élancera dans le ciel.
T-minus 30 seconds and counting.
30 secondes avant le lancement.
Standing by for terminal count.
On attend le tout dernier compte à rebours.
À tous de DDO, attention pour les décomptes finales. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, unité, top. Allumage Vulcain.
Engine start.
Donc, mise à feu du moteur.
And
Allumage
liftoff.
UAP, décollage.
Decollage, liftoff from a tropical rainforest to the edge of time itself. James Webb begins a voyage back to the birth of the universe. Punching a hole through the clouds, 20 seconds into the flight, good pitch program reported.
Un chemin à travers les nuages.
Trajectoire est nominale.
Vehicle performance is nominal.
Les performances sont nominales pour le lanceur.
The Ariane 5 rocket
La fusée
continues
Ariane 5 continue
to fly uphill in nominal fashion.
de façon tout à fait nominale.
The rumble of the powerful
La
Ariane
propulsion est
5 now
nominale.
being felt here in the control center.
Assourdissant de ce décollage
3D
qui
animation.
atteint le centre Jupiter maintenant avec un petit décalage. On voit
Nous entendons le bruit et nous sentons les vibrations
13 kilometers in
actuellement.
altitude, 7 kilometers
13 km
downrange,
d'altitude.
traveling
On est
about
à une vitesse
0.6 kilometers per second.
de
Tous les paramètres à bord sont normaux.
5 km par
The
seconde.
trajectory reported to be nominal by Jean-Luc Voyer, the range operations manager.
Comme l'entend de la
You
bouche
can
de
see at the
Voyer
bottom of
à
your
l'instant.
screen the
On
yellow
va
line is
voyez
the
la ligne jaune,
trajectory
c'est la
plot,
trajectoire,
perfectly overlaid over the
effective,
green line, which was the
qui,
pre-launch trajectory.
Suit exactement la
1 minute,
prévision
41
de
seconds
vol,
into the
qui est la
flight,
courbe
about
en
40
vert.
seconds away from
Pilotage est calme.
shutdown of the
Et,
solid rocket
il nous
boosters.
reste 40 secondes avant la séparation des propulseurs d'appoint à poudre
Coming up on the 2-minute mark into the flight.
qui se fera à 2 minutes 21.
When it detects the threshold on acceleration, not the deceleration, but
Lorsqu'il détecte
less acceleration.
Tous les paramètres à bord sont normaux.
il y aura une accélération
Everything is
moindre,
okay. Everything is normal.
et tout se
2
passe
minutes, 15
bien,
seconds into the
tout est
flight.
normal.
When the computer
Donc,
detects this
2
threshold,
minutes
it will separate.
L'ordinateur va
Séparation des EAP.
détecter ce seuil
We have
et
confirmation
on
of
verra la
solid rocket
séparation
booster
des boosters.
separation from Jean-Luc
on
Voyer.
vient d'avoir
This coming at an altitude of
confirmation
44
de la
miles.
séparation des propulseurs
The
d'appoint
Ariane
à
5 and
poudre.
James Webb traveling
On est
almost
à
5,000
72
miles an
km
hour.
d'altitude et à une vitesse de 2
We have
km
about
par
1
seconde.
minute, 5
Il nous
seconds to
reste
go before
1
fairing
minute
jettison.
5 avant
That'll
que
be
la
the next
coiffe
critical
ne soit
milestone.
larguée, qui sera le prochain jalon important de ce vol.
The fairing is there to avoid the
coiffe
satellite being exposed
est utilisée
to
pour
high temperatures
éviter
and also high
télescope
airflows.
d'être
And
exposé
as
aux
soon as the launcher
températures élevées
leaves
et
the
au flux
atmosphere,
d'air
as is
élevé.
now the case,
Et dès
the
que le
satellite does
lanceur
not
quitte
need anymore to be
l'atmosphère,
protected and
on n'a plus besoin de
Webb
protéger
does
le
not need anymore to
télescope.
be
Paramètres à bord
protected.
sont normaux.
Plus besoin
So
de cette
each
protection.
kilogram
Donc
being
chaque
very important for the
kilo
performance
est
of the
très
launch,
important pour
we
la
are going to
performance du
eject
lanceur.
this
Donc
no more
nous
useful
allons
fairing.
éjecter cette coiffe qui n'est plus utile.
And let's go down to the floor in the Jupiter Control Center to Raphael Chevrier of Arianespace. Raphael, so far so good.
Hi Rob, so far so good. Everything is nominal as we say when attitude and trajectory of the Ariane 5 is going perfectly well. As you can see also on the yellow line, on the screen, we had the confirmation of the separation of the two surfaces and now of the fairing, meaning that we have crossed the limits of the atmosphere. So everything is going.
Tous les paramètres à bord sont normaux.
And the DDO just said that all parameters are going perfectly smoothly. So let's continue the mission.
And Raphael, this is a view from the upper stage camera called the VikiCam, looking back at the James Webb Space Telescope. This is on about a 20-second delay or so because the way the imagery is processed here in the control room. There's your telescope ready to unfurl its wings, basically, and begin its journey to report from Jean-Legrand's point, the L2 point, about 1 million miles away from Earth.
1,5 de kilomètres de la Terre, de notre petite
The liftoff time confirmed here in the Mission Control Center and reporting from Greenwich Mean Time, 9:20 a.m. Peru time, 7:20 a.m. Eastern time.
À Kourou et 7h20 à l'heure de Washington.
The liftoff time confirmed here in the Mission Control Center at 12:20 Greenwich Mean Time, 9:20 a.m. Peru time, 7:20 a.m. Eastern time.
À Kourou et 7h20 à l'heure de Washington.
The Ariane 5 and James Webb, 181 kilometers in altitude, 450 kilometers downrange from the launch site here in Kourou.
Kilomètres d'altitude déjà.
Flight control is very smooth.
Contrôle du vol est
5 minutes, 12 seconds into the flight. We have about 3.5 minutes to go in main stage or first stage performance. And again, you can see at the bottom of your screen the yellow plot line overlaid over the green line, meaning we are right on course, right down the pike, and a perfect trajectory so far for the Ariane 5 rocket.
Tous les paramètres à bord sont normaux.
All telemetry data are now
Toutes
received
les
by
données
the Galileo
télémétriques
tracking
sont
station,
actuellement reçues
which is
par
close
la
to here,
station
where
de
we are
poursuite Galileo, près
Kourou.
d'ici, où nous nous trouvons à Kourou.
It will track
Cette
the
station
launcher
va suivre le
ignition
lanceur
of its upper
jusqu'à
stage,
Pilotage calme, la
l'allumage
propulsion
de
est
l'étage
nominale.
and then
supérieur.
we'll have
Et
the
ensuite,
natal station in Brazil,
la station natale au
Ascension
Brésil,
as you
la
can see on the
station
map, in the middle of the
Ascension
ocean,
au milieu de
and the two
l'océan
last
Atlantique
stations
et
in
les
Africa.
deux dernières stations en
Libreville and
Afrique,
Malindi, one on the east
Libreville
coast, the other
et
one on the west
Malindi.
coast. And the one on the west coast, Malindi, you can see
sur
that
la
the
côte
satellite will be, the
orientale,
telescope will be separated
Libreville
more,
est sur la côte
more or
orientale
less over this
et
Malindi station.
l'étage
This Malindi
supérieur
station
sera
will also
séparé
require
plus ou moins
the
au-dessus de
telemetry
cette
data from the
station de
telescope.
Malindi. Et
You can see
cette
both
station
are
va
green,
également recevoir
Galileo
des
and data on this
premières
animation.
données
It means they
du
are
télescope.
expected to
Et
receive
donc,
the data, and it was confirmed
ces
right
stations
now by the
doivent
launch
recevoir des données
operations
et
manager.
le
Acquisition de
CDO vient
télémesures
de confirmer
par la
que ces
station du
données ont
Natal
bien
au
été
Brésil.
reçues. Les premières données
Just
depuis le
confirming
lanceur.
now that telemetry is being processed through the Brazilian tracking station. The telescope is also processing telemetry through the tracking and data relay satellite system as it moves further and further out into deep space. All of the telescope's telemetry and its imagery ultimately will be processed through the Deep Space Network in Goldstone, California. We passed the 7-minute mark into the flight. A perfect ride so far on the Ariane 5. We have about 1.5 minutes to go in the first stage performance. Once the main stage engine is commanded to cut off, it will be jettisoned, and just a few seconds after that, the upper stage engine will ignite, and it will be the workhorse for a 16-minute burn that will put James Webb into its preliminary orbit.
16 minutes pour mettre le James Webb sur son orbite de transfert.
About 11 minutes from now, telescope controllers at the Space Telescope Science Institute will be sending commands to prepare James Webb for the initial series of commissioning activities that will lead to the deployment of its solar array and the initiation of generation of electrical power for the telescope.
L'alimentation des panneaux
About 30
en
seconds away from
électricité
main
en
engine
quelques
cutoff.
secondes avant l'extinction de l'étage principal.
La trajectoire est normale.
Nominal trajectory continues to be the watchword for the day from the Range Operations Manager, Jean-Luc
ne
Voyer,
cesse de nous être répété par
as
le
we stand by for
DDO
main
Jean-Luc
engine
Voyer.
shutdown and
Et
separation.
nous nous approchons donc l'extinction du Vulcain 2 et sa séparation.
Séparation EPC.
And we have main stage shutdown and separation
Donc,
confirmed here in the Mission
de
Control
l'étage
Center,
principal
and the ignition of that
et
Allumage
stage.
ESC.
And
Séparation.
Raphaël Chevrier
Donc,
down in the
Raphaël
fishbowl.
Chevrier dans le
So far, so
fishbowl.
good.
Qu'est-ce que vous avez à nous dire là-dessus? Oui, nous avons eu confirmation effectivement de
La trajectoire
la
est
séparation
nominale.
de l'étage principal et l'allumage de l'étage supérieur. C'est absolument nominal, la trajectoire est nominale et c'est vrai que c'est un critique la mise à feu de l'espace, de l'étage cryogénique en plein espace. Et nous sommes maintenant à 230 km d'altitude, la vitesse est à peu près 7 km par seconde et nous abordons la deuxième phase du vol désormais. L'étage va rester en propulsion pendant environ 16 minutes pour mettre James Webb sur orbite et là encore tout est nominal comme vient de l'annoncer le DDO.
And a short time from now, the so-called sawtooth maneuver
la manœuvre de
will get
dents de
underway.
scie se
Again, like
mettra en
rocking a
œuvre.
baby in a
C'est un peu
cradle, this
comme
will
un
be
bébé dans un
a maneuver to
berceau.
keep
On
Webb
fait balancer comme ça
from
pour protéger le
overheating.
James Webb d'une surchauffe.
Effectivement, Rob, tout à fait comme un bébé dans un berceau. Ici, on voit Webb arriver en haut du lanceur Ariane 5 dans une configuration spatiale. Ce sera différent pendant sa durée de vie, mais là, pour l'instant, il faut tout à fait replier.
La propulsion est nominale.
Un grand nombre d'études approfondies ont été réalisées par les équipes mission en Europe et en les uns sur la manière de protéger le télescope et comment les rayons du Soleil pourraient se propager et interagir avec ces instruments si délicats à l'intérieur du télescope. Et comme vous comprenez, c'est vraiment clé de faire ces manœuvres pour protéger ces instruments.
And to produce these right thermal conditions inside Webb, a specific roll law has been designed, what we call the sawtooth approach.
En roulis, une manœuvre spéciale a été conçue.
La propulsion est nominale.
Vous voyez sur cette animation que l'étage supérieur va tourner à 30 degrés d'un côté et va revenir à 20 degrés. Il fait ce petit mouvement tout en douceur, un petit va-et-vient pour protéger le télescope du Soleil.
Noting that after Webb separates from the upper stage of the Ariane 5 rocket, which continues to perform in excellent fashion, and coming up on the 12-minute mark into the flight, the telescope controllers will be taking the baton, if you will, from the mission controllers here in Kourou. The first steps will be the opening of fuel valves, a pair of fuel valves, to start flowing fuel to Webb's onboard thrusters. They then will power on the valve drive electronics. Those are powered on in preparation to control and fire those thrusters when required. Webb's solar array is scheduled to be deployed at approximately the 33-minute mark into the flight. Once it is locked in place, we'll get the call that electricity is flowing through the array. That call will come from the mission operations manager, Carl Starr, who is at the Space Telescope Science Institute at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore.
télescope spatial à Baltimore, qui est juste à côté de lui, c'est Alicia Star, une paire d'étoiles qui nous emmène avec James Webb à la découverte de l'univers. Ces ingénieurs ont été
de la télévision pour la station d'ascension.
Panneaux et que l'électricité aura été alimentée. On aura les radiateurs qui vont être mis en action pour éviter un refroidissement de la structure. Et ce sera aussi pour protéger les instruments optiques de toute condensation d'eau glacée.
La propulsion est nominale, tous les paramètres à bord sont normaux.
Preventing water ice condensation later to be used to position each of the mirror's segments. All 6 reaction wheels and the wheel drive electronics will be powered on for Webb, and that will be the precursor to the attitude control system using those reaction wheels to maintain the proper orientation with the sun, as opposed to using onboard thrusters. Of course, fuel in those thrusters, very valuable. It's a limited commodity for the lifetime of James Webb's observations
important, il faut pouvoir l'économiser pour l'observation de l'univers par la suite.
We're 13 minutes 55 seconds.
Tous les paramètres à bord sont normaux.
50 secondes de vol.
Boyer, the range operations manager, continues to report a nominal performance for James Webb.
Nominales pour le James Webb.
And again, Luce Fabregat from the European Space Agency, how is this trajectory being carefully and methodically adjusted to provide the correct parameters in the final stages of ascent?
Yes, Rob, as you can see on this plot, the altitude is slightly going down. It's perfectly normal. The launch vehicle is really on the line where it should be. This decrease of its altitude, slight decrease of its altitude, will allow the launcher to benefit and the upper stage to benefit of the gravity effect and to increase its velocity until it reaches the thermal threshold. It's about to reach it or even already reached it now, and it will go up. And now it will go up and
atteint là maintenant et vous allez voir, il va commencer à monter jusqu'à ce qu'il sépare le télescope Webb.
On a highly elliptic orbit, but still around the Earth. The telescope will be released, inserted on an orbit around the Earth with an apogee, a very high apogee above the
trajectoire est normale.
Trajectory nominal as reported by Jean-Luc Boyer. You see him in that view, 185 kilometers in altitude, some 4,500 kilometers downrange from the launch site here in Kourou, moving at more than 8 kilometers per second. Right on the plot, right on the trajectory, everything looking great. We are about 9 minutes away from the completion of upper stage ignition, its shutdown, and then about a 2.5-minute coast phase before Webb will separate. Observatory separation will be called out. You'll be hearing those calls and the initial calls from Carl Starr, the mission operations manager at the Space Telescope Science Institute at Johns Hopkins, through solar array deploy and the declaration of a power-positive spacecraft. James Webb, of course, will be traveling well beyond the moon to a distance of about 1 million miles away from Earth, settling into a highly elliptical halo-like orbit in its astronomical observations.
And as you can see, we have a successful launch at this point. We are going to just continue to monitor the launch here. But where did our feed go? We're coming back to getting the feed here, but just give us 1 second as we get into our... Here. There we go. Sorry about that. We have a number of different feeds that we've got. The European Space Agency, we've got NASA TV with Rob Navius providing commentary there. And I just wanted to drop in while we're sort of in a, I won't say an unexciting phase, but at this point, basically the first stage is still burning. And the spacecraft, as you saw, has flown from South America. It's already crossed the continent of Africa. And you'll notice that it's basically heading along the equator of the Earth, or sort of directly east. The reason for that, of course, is that as the Earth rotates, you wind up having a really excellent sort of boost to your velocity, because the Earth essentially is throwing the spacecraft towards the east from its rotation. So you gain almost 1,000 kilometers an hour of velocity from your spacecraft if you launch east. And if you launch, north or south, when you're going into an orbit that will cover more of the Earth, you don't get that benefit. But here, with such a large payload, and because we don't care about the Earth at this point, we're just looking at getting to a specific spot in space, you can basically use as much of that velocity as possible. That's why the European Space Agency's spaceport is not in Europe, but is down in the equatorial regions in French Guiana, to benefit from that level of extra velocity. They only launch spacecraft that are unmanned, and so no crew on board. But the Soyuz rocket launches from there. The Ariane series launches from there. A few other things, mostly satellites and commercial programs that are launched from there, but no people. And so being down near the equator makes a whole lot of sense. We've got about 6 minutes left in the first stage burn, and so we're just going to see if we can head over to take a look at a little bit more about the deployment of the telescope once we get there. So let's just switch over another view here, and I'll make sure we don't lose our feed. Well, that's okay. We'll manually move it around. Isn't that interesting? Okay. So at this point, there's nothing to see, of course. We were watching some computer animations, so I figured we might as well watch the computer animations that I was going to talk about. James was asking, when does it start unfurling? Does it get out there first? No, it turns out that pretty much as soon as the launch is over and things have stabilized, the telescope starts to unfurl. The solar panel at the bottom is the first thing to pop out. On my little paper model here that I made from the NASA's website, there's a single solar panel that extends and folds out here, and that begins powering up the spacecraft. There's also an antenna that deploys from the bottom that allows the communications at a higher rate of speed to the Earth. It's like a little satellite dish that allows direct communication. Almost immediately after, just a few hours after the launch, we start unfolding these sunscreens. And as you see, they sort of fold down and then stretch out and then unfold like origami. That is the critical part of the mission, and it is the most unknown part of the mission. You can't really test this situation because it's designed to happen in zero gravity in space. And it's not just like stretching out a piece of paper or something like that. You've got these thin layers of mylar, the thickness of a human hair, that have to be tensioned and stretched out. If you've ever set up a tent, think about setting up a tent, except it's made out of material so thin that you could tear it very easily, and you basically are floating in zero gravity, and you have to stretch things out without being able to put the poles and the pegs and things like that into the ground. It's kind of a nightmare. But this has been tested on the ground. They have done 4 full deployment tests of the sunshade. And, Hollis says we're cutting in and out. Yeah, there's a little bit of internet issue here. I think it's this video. The video might just be a little bit too big. So we're just going to come back to... We're just going to come back to here. The little tent situation is definitely very awkward. So stretching out these solar shades has been done 4 times on the ground. The 4th time it was 100% successful. That leads me to believe that the first 3 times there were some issues, which they used to correct it. But as the engineers pointed out, it only needs to work once more in space. And so they got it perfectly working. This wasn't like a test of a different system. This was a test of the actual flight hardware. So it worked perfectly on the last deploy. They got all the bugs worked out, and so hopefully it will work perfectly this time. This is a mission critical. Oh, thanks, James. Okay, yeah, you know, I think that animation is just too big for my little computer. The unfurling has to go perfectly. The instruments need to be as close to absolute zero as possible. And even the heat from the sun at 1.5 million, the heat from the Earth, pardon me, at 1.5 million kilometers, the heat from the sun at 150 million kilometers is enough to make the temperature go up too high. Now we're talking minus 200 or 250 degrees or so Celsius. So it is definitely very, very cold. But even that temperature is enough to sort of raise the background level of the instruments and wash out the faint things. It's kind of like the equivalent of light pollution here on the ground, where astronomers, you know, you're in the city and there's too many streetlights around and you can't see very faint objects with your telescope. It's the same equivalent, because the Webb Space Telescope is basically looking at heat, looking at infrared radiation. And so any source of heat is a problem. People are often scared about the launch because you've got this big rocket that's basically a controlled explosion. You hope it stays a controlled explosion and doesn't turn into an uncontrolled one. But frankly, Ariane has launched 100 times. They had a few issues on their first test flights, but it's flown like the last 97 missions have been 100% successful. So it's very reliable. And it looks like our second stage has now ignited. The rocket is, the first stage has fallen away. The second stage engine started, and that is sending Webb onto its trajectory out to L2. So this will burn for a number of minutes as well. And that was another sort of milestone in the launch. You know, when those engines start, that's the time when any problems happen. Once they're burning, usually things are going okay. Once the engines are done, we sort of get out to the point where we're unfurling those solar shades. That's mission critical. And the other part, of course, is folding out the mirrors of the telescope. The 3 segments on either side of the telescope would be too wide to fit in the rocket, so they had to be folded up, and they have to unfold. If they don't unfold, our mirror is smaller and not the right shape. Now, it turns out that they can get most of their mission accomplished if 17 of the 18 segments are under control. But if one of those folds doesn't happen, that's 3 mirror segments, it will lose a lot of its capability and won't have quite the resolution that we'd hoped. However, if those solar shades deploy, we've got a mission. And frankly, if there's something goes wrong, I have confidence in the NASA and CSA and ESA folks that they'll be able to solve it. I mean, sure, we can't send a space shuttle up with astronauts to fix things, but they do have a whole bunch of contingencies on what if one of the pulleys jams, or what if something doesn't unfold. Some of them are really creative technical solutions. Other ones are just use the thrusters to shake it back and forth a little bit and hope it comes loose, which is the kind of solution that I would come up with if I was doing this. I just had to put the Christmas lights up on the tree a couple of weeks ago, and you get all those cables out, and they're all tangled up, and sometimes you sit there very methodically and carry them out, and other times you just sort of pull on it and shake it, and sometimes that works. That can work with a $10 billion telescope as well. So we're going to pop back to the live feed here and see what the ESA has to say. There's not a whole lot going on now. Like I say, we're off the ground, and so really it's a matter of just waiting to get all of those confirmations that everything is working. So let's rejoin Ariane Space and take a look at what's going on.
Séparation Webb Space Telescope. Go Webb!
We do have confirmation of observatory separation.
On vient d'avoir confirmation de
Webb
séparation de
Space
l'observatoire
Telescope
James Webb
amidst
et son
applause here in the Mission
télescope qui
Control
sont
Center,
salués par les
now
applaudissements
taking its
dans
first
la
steps
salle
in
Jupiter
pursuit of
ici, et
cosmological
le
discovery.
James Webb fait ses premiers pas dans cet espace qui va lui réserver tant de
It was a
découvertes.
perfect ride to orbit,
C'était un vol absolument sans anicroche, parfait.
and all of the separation sequence events
Toutes
are
les
running in
séquences
good
de
fashion
séparation
according
se
to the
sont
telescope
déroulées
controllers.
conformément à toutes les prévisions.
And there is the
Et
view
voici,
from the upper
nous
stage
voyons
camera on the
maintenant
Ariane
la
5
caméra,
looking at the James Webb Space
l'étage
Telescope
supérieur
as it moves
de l'Ariane 5 qui nous
gently
fait
away
découvrir ces images du
from this
télescope
launch
qui
vehicle.
s'éloigne de son lanceur, de sa matrice.
It's kind of nice to know that even NASA and the European Space Agency have Wi-Fi issues, just like we do down here on Earth. That's the camera from the rocket itself, and it is broadcasting what it considers to be a live feed of the view. But of course, by the time it gets transmitted and processed and sent around and then actually put out onto the real internet, there's about a 20-second delay. But we do see that basically the Ariane rocket's job is over. The launch has been successful. They're going to confirm the trajectory now to make sure that Webb is going on the correct path, but everything was working properly. It does have thrusters on board to correct that as necessary. So at this point, Webb is on its way to L2, and that is where we will be waiting. That is where it'll arrive in about a month, 1.5 million kilometers away from the Earth, and it gives us a great view of the universe. And there's the solar panel unfolding. We can see the solar panel has begun to deploy. That's another, one of those mission critical things. That's the power for the spacecraft. And without that, we would have a big problem. So the solar panel's up. If the next step will be the high gain antenna, I didn't think we'd have live images of this. This is pretty cool. It's not a great image, but certainly you can see the solar panel was coming out there, and now, the auto gain of the camera is just overexposing things. But that's okay. Spacecraft is on its way. James Webb on the way to L2 to get a great view of the universe. So as we mentioned, L2 is this unusual spot where the gravitational forces of Earth and Sun sort of balance out so that it's very efficient to keep a spacecraft there. There are a bunch of L points, or Lagrange points, not named after the ZZ Top song, but the astronomer and mathematician Lagrange, who sort of calculated these positions. One of them is between the Earth and the Sun, and we've actually got some spacecraft out there at L1 watching the Sun. It's a good place to just sit and watch the Sun. We've also got now James Webb on the way out to L2. L3 is opposite the Sun from the Earth in a similar kind of orbit to L2, and then L4 and L5 are kind of out at angles from the Earth and the Sun, so about 60 degrees on either side of the Earth and Sun. And so these are points where the gravitational forces make it most efficient to be able to stay in certain alignments relative to the Earth. So it's not necessarily the most efficient orbit around the Sun or anything like that, but it does let you stay in a relative orientation to the Earth as the Earth goes around. And as you can see, Webb is sort of orbiting the L2 point when it gets out there, and so it does this sort of merry-go-round horse up and down, or maybe like a dolphin, swimming and jumping out of the water. Very elegant kind of orbit. And that will allow it to keep the sunshade pointed towards the Sun, keep the telescope in the dark and nice and cool, and allow it to do all of its great imaging. Here's the mission control crew at Arianespace. They've been working hard for the last number of months and years, really, and it all came down to 26 minutes of sheer terror hoping everything goes right. And now, literally, that career-defining event is over for them, and there's literally nothing left for them to do. So I imagine there's going to be some serious celebrations today, later on, for a Christmas day. Not that there wouldn't have been anyway, but certainly pretty exciting. And you can just see the joy on this is the Ariane Space commentators' face. They're just so excited that everything worked. It's like the NASA guys when we landed on Mars or things like that. It's that same kind of moment, even though the mission itself hasn't accomplished any of its science goals or anything like that. The one big stage is over. And now over the next 30 days, we will be watching the deployment of the telescope. We will be watching the different stages of the sun shield being unfolded and so on. And as it coasts out to L2, we have about 30 days as they sort of get everything all ready. Once it's out in L2, they wait for the instruments to cool down. They check out all the power. They check out basically everything. It's a 6-month commissioning time for Webb. Now, we may get a few pictures back before that, but they're the equivalent of your test pictures, when you take a quick picture with your camera to see if the light level's okay and to make sure everything's focused and things like that. I'm not expecting too much from those first images, but after everything's commissioned, after all of the mirrors have been aligned and calibrated and things like that, there's a insanely complicated process just to get all of those mirrors to be pointing in the right direction and focused, essentially. That's when the fun will begin. Now, obviously, we're not staying with live coverage for the next 6 months. I did pitch that idea, but it's apparently not in the cards. But we will be covering the Webb mission. For those of you that just joined us because of the launch, you may not know, but Dome at Home is a program that the Manitoba Museum's Planetarium runs every Thursday at 7 p.m. Central Standard Time here in North America. We're based out of Winnipeg, Manitoba in Treaty 1 territory. And every Thursday we will be updating you on the Webb. What it's doing, what's going on, any problems that may come up. So we'll have a Webb update on all of our shows. You can also join us on the Manitoba Museum's Facebook and YouTube pages. And we'll have updates on things that are going on there as well. My name is Scott Young. I'm the planetarium astronomer at the Manitoba Museum. You can find me on Facebook as Scott the Skywatcher. And I'll also be doing some updates as things go along. And I'll share all of our links that we have for the paper model and the Webb Space Telescope and the museum and so on. I'll drop them into the chat here. At this point, we're going to be wrapping up our live coverage of the successful launch of the James Webb Space Telescope. The rocket's job is done, and Webb is on its way to explore the early reaches of the universe, with some Canadian instruments on board. For all of you that joined us here today live, thank you so much for getting up early with me. It really made my day to see so many folks online with us. Nice to see some old friends and make some new ones. Merry Christmas if you celebrate. Happy holidays. And thank you for joining us. I will see you all again Thursday at 7 p.m. with another update. Have a great day, and we will see you soon.